Welcome to the January edition of the Northwood University Alumni and Friends webinar series. My name is Julia Damchek. I will be your host and moderator today. Topic is Capitalism at the Crossroads, Why Free Markets Matter More Than Ever. Our special guest today is Dr. Timothy G. Nash, well known to many of us. He is Senior VP Emeritus and Director of the Northwood University Center for the Advancement of Freedom, Free Enterprise, and Entrepreneurship. Dr. Nash is, of course, a 1981 graduate of Northwood University and also holds a master's degree from CMU and a doctoral degree from Wayne State University. He has published numerous articles, produced a number of economic studies, and, of course, continues to be featured on many radio shows and podcasts. So if you follow him, I'm sure you've heard him and read him many times. Just a few reminders. We are recording this and we'll send out the recording to all of you after we have completed this today. Please respond to the survey we send you as well regarding our webinar and share your thoughts. And then at the end of the webinar today, we're also going to leave some time for Q&A. So utilize that Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Nash.
Thank you very much, Julie. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be back with you with one of Julie's webinars. I've listened in on a number of them, and I'm honored to be a presenter with this one. We have a couple of articles. The title Julie read, and then another title is In Defense of Capitalism. The one that Julie noted is published in Real Clear Markets. And then this article that I'm about to use as the guidepost for my talk is from the Detroit News. And I wanted to also thank my co-authors, Gabriel Benzakri, Bob Thomas, who's the CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, the COO, and Tom Raston, who's a retired business executive and PhD in engineering from Ohio. And we all know that Gabriel's our Fry chair. I know David's up there very proud that Gabriel holds that position. So the thesis today is, can capitalism survive? There's so many different meanings to people regarding capitalism, and what does capitalism mean? What is it trying to tell us about the world, the economy? And so Gabriel and I started talking. We were kind of surprised, I'd say to some degree, that a young socialist with not a lot of experience, looked like he was going to win, and then he became the mayor of New York just recently, New York City. Same thing happened in Portland. Minneapolis has a socialist mayor, and some might say the governor is a socialist governor. And it seems also that you look at people like Bernie Sanders, he seems to be, along with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, seems to be the leading voices for the Democratic Party nationally. So, the question to ask is America turning towards socialism? And if so, can it survive? What would happen to the United States if we move toward capitalism? And so what we've done in this article is to note that, first and foremost, many times in the history of the world, socialism has been the key political driver. Some form of socialism could be, some people talk about market socialism or communism, which is a form of socialism Marx was an advocate of, and a lot of different systems in between. So as you look through and you think about what's happening in the United States, can we truly take from the private sector to the public sector, grocery stores, Can we take from the private sector to the public sector? Manufacturing of automobiles, buses, homes. And the answer from the socialists is absolutely yes. And yet we look at so many examples that people say, well, what about China, Nash? Well, China actually was a strict communist system, and they are much more market driven. So they moved away from strict communism toward a version of market socialism. So I would not like to live in China, but they've moved away from strict communism, strict socialism toward capitalism. And then if you look at, countries like Sweden have dramatically renovated their model and moved away from socialism toward capitalism, privatized a number of different segments of the economy. So socialism in the modern era didn't work. In the good old days of even going back to Adam Smith, socialism just didn't work. So if we take that as the standard to take a look at or to compare, uh, let's take a look at the United States over the last 150 years. In the last 150 years, the United States went from a great experiment, by the mid to late 19 or 1800s after the Civil War, and we had been moving in many cases toward a capitalist system, but we really made our giant leaps with privatization, invention, and innovation in the last 150 years. And if you think about it or you analyze where we are in the post-Civil War era, you can say that Joseph Schumpeter was absolutely right. And he said that capitalism has fed more people, clothed more people, raised the standard of living of more people than all economic systems in the history of the world combined. But he also said, but it would sow its seeds for its own destruction for the people that benefit most from capitalism, meaning business leaders, the wealthy, know not how to defend it. And so when you're thinking about the outline that Dan has in place of my face that's only made for radio, what you see is that the first category is our assertion that central planning cannot compete with the free market. And that's the essential point that leads us to believe that capitalism is a superior system and is a dramatically improved system. And by the way, you don't see the United States or any other capitalist systems, but especially the United States, putting up walls to keep people out. Because remember, the Berlin Wall was not put up to keep people out of East Germany. The Berlin Wall was put up to keep people in, to prevent them from leaving for freedom, for a better life. So when you think about this whole notion of central planning, Friedrich Hayek, in his monumental work, Knowledge and Society, which he published in 1945, he notes that the reason why a free market system is superior is because the market is constantly sending signals. And millions and millions and millions, tens, hundreds of millions of Americans every day send their opinion on the quality of product you're producing as a company, the availability of your product, the durability of your product. And so you have millions of votes every day coming from consumers. And every person, ladies and gentlemen, gets a vote. So whether you're a poor person, a rich person, somebody in between, you buy a product, you're signaling the market. You don't buy something, you're also sending a signal. If you buy the company's product, you're saying, good job. I'll try you again next week. If you don't buy it, you're sending them a signal that either you can't afford it and it's too high, or you don't like the product, or maybe there's a new, better product out there on the market. And the problem is that Hayek notes that in a socialist system, you have these small government planning bureaus where very few government bureaucrats have anything to say about what's being produced, how it's being produced, where it's going to be sold. And so the reason why, I remember you'd hear stories about people going to the Soviet Union in the 1970s and early 80s, and they'd bring 5 or 6 pairs of Levi's blue jeans. And you could sell Levi's blue jeans in Moscow for $200 a pair of jeans, and they were selling in the United States for 25. And the standard of living was like 1/5 the standard of living in the Soviet Union versus the United States. So the fact of the matter is, the market gets signals and gets better signals and more abundant signals, more consistent signals. And that's why companies come and go. That's why invention and innovation is at a high level in capitalist countries. Highest of any country would be the United States, where you're not only trying to innovate, which is to take an existing product and make it better, but you're also trying to invent, meaning I'm going to produce something that's so unique, so different, some people say patentable, that it replaces the old product and is dramatically better and different. And so these are the kinds of things that are very important as it relates to noting the biggest difference and benefit of capitalism versus socialism. In the second category in the paper, it says capitalism's moral and economic foundation. And here, what Friedman wrote in his highly regarded 1962 book, Capitalism and Freedom, is that people are purchasing products, goods, services. And what Friedman argues most is that economic liberty is a prerequisite to political liberty. In fact, he'll even say you can look at a number of Asian countries, Indonesia in some cases in its history, where you're saying to the consumer, I can take this product and produce it as long as I've got economic liberty. I don't even need political liberty, but if I have economic liberty, I can do quite well in this economy. Economic and political liberty is best, like you have in the United States. And so the point is that from economic liberty comes political liberty, which then sets the stage for private property rights, meaning you can own your business. Sets the stage for limited government. Government takes a small percent of the country's GDP, and that's local, state, and federal combined. Sound money that has low inflation, rule of law, voluntary exchange, and the system is driven by the profit and loss system. Meaning, if your business can't make it, if the way you have it organized is not profitable, then you can't turn to the government and ask for subsidies. You will have that dependent on its success as a business, or if you can get someone to loan you money to make the right changes, but the government doesn't step in and bail you out under those situations. And so when you're thinking about it, Friedman would often say, in a free market capitalist system, the customer is king, the customer is queen, or in essence, the customer is royalty. And so the customer is treated with great respect and with great respect and great value, because if you don't satisfy the customer, you're going to go out of business. And in essence, it's the customer that says you're here today and you're gone tomorrow. And that's what's such an amazing part of the capitalist system. Third category is the power of creative destruction. And this comes from the great work of Joseph Schumpeter, who was born in Switzerland, taught at Lausanne University on the banks of Lake Geneva, and spent probably the foremost part of his career at Harvard. And that's where most of his papers and research studies are on reserve at the library. And so when you look at it, in his great book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, Schumpeter spent a lot of time talking about creative destruction. And he spent a lot of time talking about how a product that was produced under a free market system, it was the competition and the creative nature of the economic system that had new products replace old products. And again, I'll stay with this somewhat limited idea, but you know that in 1890 in the United States, we had roughly 1 million automobiles produced and sold in the US, employing about 90,000 people. And then the automobile was introduced to the market late 1800s. The Model T was 1908. And by 1920, we produced 2.3 million automobiles in the US and sold about 2 million of them in the United States. Just under a million was the record for horse-drawn carriages in 1890. And we would go on from producing 2.3 million, exporting 300,000, selling 2 million in the US in 1920, to in the early 2000s, we hit our all-time record high of just over 21 million automobiles sold in the United States, and about 16 million of those were produced in the United States. So what would have happened if we had had a government planning bureau? We might have had a situation where certainly at the time of the invention, the individuals certainly building on the notion of an automobile, tinkering with the idea of an automobile in their garages. What if in 1898, a group of well-connected buggy manufacturers went to Washington or went to the state capitol in Lansing and had the automobile banned? Where would we be today? You know, would we have an automobile? What would have happened if the train manufacturers said, "Boy, those right boys, they might be onto something in Kitty Hawk. Let's just ban that as being too risky, not very safe, and we'll ensure the history of the train, and we'll prevent the auto or the airplane industry from ever coming to fruition." But that never happened because we had a free market system, and we were not creating a marketplace ruled by the government and a small number of businesses. We were allowing entrepreneurs to come up with something, and if it was better, then we let it sink or swim based on its merits and its productivity. Now, if you use that last example, some people think we are in that category today. Some people think that we're now letting businesses use their political influences to prevent as much competition as would normally be the case. But I think what's really important, gang, is to understand that when you look at what Schumpeter was talking about, he was talking about how this creative destruction was able to produce an environment where people had tremendous amounts of invention and innovation, that they got investors to help them capitalize, and they produced some crazy things that nobody ever thought would happen. Who really would have believed that a plane could create a whole industry out of what happened at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, with the Wright brothers, about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago. And so it's important to think about and to understand where we are and where we have the opportunity to basically realize our greatest opportunities. It's not these ideas that any of us would have thought of. It's not the fact that we really believe these things could happen. We didn't, and they didn't. A lot of them didn't believe it, but they started investigating, they started researching, they started risk taking. I mean, you look at even here in Midland, H.H. Dow was an incredible inventor, an incredible risk taker. And, he took bromine or took brine to make bromine, and was one of the great creators of chlorinated chemistry in the United States. And so you think about these entrepreneurs that came to Midland because the soil samples and the rock formations and the tree formations were right for this guy to start the Dow Chemical Company. So if you then say, all right, how has life been transformed since, say, 1900 under capitalism? And I think it's important that if you look at it, in 1900, you had 5% of all Americans lived in homes that had electricity. Today, it's 100%. If you go to 1900, 1% of Americans, just under 1%, owned an automobile. Today, 92% own an automobile, light truck, or SUV. Indoor plumbing. In 1900, 1% of Americans lived in a home with indoor plumbing. It's 100% today. If you think about phones, in 1900, in apartment complexes or homes, just under 5% had access to a phone. And it usually was a hall phone for most in an apartment complex in the hallway. And people would stand in line with their coin purses and use the phone after the previous person was done. Today, it's 99.9%. And most homes don't have standard phones anymore because most people have cell phones. And so, some of us on this call that are old enough, when we were young, we didn't even, I remember having a party phone in Detroit where you'd pick up the phone and you could hear somebody else's conversation going on because it was too expensive to buy a private line. And then you think about the invention of the internet and typewriters being replaced by personal computers. And then today, when you think about everything that's happening around data centers and AI, these things are dramatically changing the world, and the United States is leading in just about all of these categories. And then maybe the most important point to make is that in 1900, 44% of Americans lived above the poverty level in 1900. Today, it's 90%. And so when you think about these things and you look at where we are today, it's just it's unbelievable to see the kinds of changes and progress that's taken place. Um, if you go through and you look at automobiles today, we're down to 16.3 million for a lot of different reasons, including Uber and ride shares and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, it is dramatically different today than it's been in a long time. But the fact of the matter is, in all of these categories, the US has been anywhere from 1 through 5 as it relates to the rest of the world. And this is not saying we ought not do something every day to improve poverty levels. But I will say this to you without any reservation. Look at how kings and queens lived in England in 1900. The vast majority of Americans live better today than the wealthiest in the world in 1900. Name one government housing project that you walk into that doesn't have heating and air conditioning. Government, whether you like it or not, is buying cell phones for a large number of the population. So what we have today is dramatically different and a dramatically higher standard of living than it's been at any point in the history of the U.S. And again, take my point, people aren't building walls around the United States to keep people in. They're building walls or they're putting up barriers to keep people out because people desire being in the United States more than most places around the world. And what I would simply say in conclusion is that capitalism isn't a perfect system, but it's an incredibly good system. Remember, Adam Smith, who's considered to be the father of economics and in some ways the father of capitalism, he wasn't an economist. There was no such thing as economics. He was considered to be the father of economics. But Adam Smith held the chair of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. He was an ethicist, and he wrote a theory of moral sentiments and a nature, or let's see, an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations, because he was trying to point out that there are ways and there are examples that allow for a better world. And he was saying the mercantilist system that favored big business and government in the late 1700s should be replaced with the capitalist system we live in today. So I hope it's useful. I sent some of you a lot of different articles. We can send those through Julie as well. I've got 5 of them that really relate to this topic. 2 of them I co-wrote with Gabriel and Tom and Bob. So at this point, if we have some time, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thanks, Dr. Nash. Yep, just a reminder, type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Thanks for the many, I know for many of us, those are some good kind of a review of our economic lessons taught at Northwood back in the day. We've just got some people in the chat saying thanks, Dr. Nash. I see Lisa House all the way. I think Lisa's in Canada. I think we got a few joining us from Canada today.
Hey.
All right, we've got a question. Sorry, they're popping in quick here now. How do tariffs play into a free market, Dr. Nash? That's from Stephen
Well,
Sharp.
Steve and I voted for Donald Trump all three times he was running for the presidency. I have two problems with our president. One, I don't like his rhetoric. I think sometimes he just says things he doesn't need to say and creates enemies. And then secondarily, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I am the only time I support tariffs would be like my mentor Milton Friedman was to protect the nation. And so tariffs for national defense purposes are great. The problem is our president has used them for a whole potpourri of different reasons. And to get the competitive advantage out of a legitimate free market competitor, I don't agree with it. Or as he said from Davos just the other day, the Swiss manufacturers, it's a small country, Switzerland, but they're producing the products they produce are great. And we have a balance of trade deficit with them. And so the president seems to think we shouldn't have any trade deficits. Well, for what they produce, we're not good at producing what they produce. They're really good in pharmaceuticals. We're good. In some ways, they may be better. The watches that they produce, some of the precision tools they produce, they're the best in the world. And so that I would say, if we have a trade deficit with Switzerland, so be it. But here's the other point, and I'll give you a more broad view. If you look at, say, Canada, at least this home country, if you look at it, the United States is a country of about 350 million people. Canada is a country of about 42, 43 million people. So if you took the total population of Canada and you looked at it versus the United States, you would have to have the average American or the average Canadian buying 8 times as much from America as the average American bought from Canada in order to have a balance of trade. And so with a lot of these countries, because there's a balance of trade deficit, part of it could be just the sheer size of one country versus another. And then when you look at the economic advantage that the United States has, we're not only the largest economy in the world with one of the smallest countries relative to our GDP, but we also have a very high standard of living. So in some of these cases, these are natural occurrences, these tariffs, and there's not a lot we should do other than to say we should work harder, find different products that we need to get into their countries. And if they have tariff barriers that are really high on some legitimate products, that's the decision the president has to make or should make. But my only time that I would endorse a tariff would be to protect the security of the United States, meaning if countries were stealing our trade secrets or countries were fabricating our production processes. That's where I would step in. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, I've got another one here. Do we really have a capitalist system, or are we really living in more of a market socialist system, given tax rates and the large welfare state?
Well, my good friend Murray Kite, our VP of Advancement, we were exchanging some text this morning, and one of the points that Murray and I were talking about is, if you look at economics and like from the Gortney and Stroop book that I used to teach a lot of you from, on the far left would be capitalism, and on the far right would be socialism. if you're like some of my students, why can't we make the far left socialism and the far right capitalism? Doesn't matter. Do it whatever way you want. But as you move toward the center, and let's say that the capitalism is on the left, as you move toward the center, it means you're going from libertarianism and basically little to no government intervention to more and more government intervention. And so the question that was just asked is absolutely right. We're not as free as we used to be. Now, if you look at it, and you go back to 1900, local, state, and federal government combined consumed 7.8% of US GDP. That's pretty low. And today it's, depending on whose measurement you use, between 38 and 42% of GDP is being consumed. Are we quite socialist? Some people would say no, because the real socialist countries are consuming more and more. And so relative to the rest of the world, we're not socialist versus the overall norm. But by 1900 standards, we certainly would be socialism, or defined as a socialist country. I remember my dear friend, and I'm sure all of your favorites that are Northwood grads, a few decades ago, Dr. Haywood used to say that he defines capitalism, pure capitalism, as if you make a dollar and you get to keep the whole dollar, that's capitalism. That's ideal freedom, free markets. If you make a dollar and you get to keep 95 cents, that's good, but in his book, not good enough. And if you make a dollar and you only get to keep 50 cents, that's borderline socialism, communism. So
Thanks, Tim.
we need to reduce the size and scope of government. And our national debt at almost $39 trillion is a real problem today.
All right, Tim, I've got a question from Don Gottwald. Hi, Don.
Hi,
It
Don.
says many people on this call would have exposure to many of the concepts as alumni. How do we get more of the world to understand these pretty straightforward concepts?
I think it's a great question that Don asks. And I've dedicated my semi-retirement to uh, doing interviews on radio and television, writing books, writing articles, and writing articles in areas that maybe you're uncomfortable with, so you learn more about those areas. And so, something like real clear energy has been a new area. I've done some research with Tom Raston in the energy area, and it's been a delight working with Tom and his recently departed wife Karen, and their foundations. To talk about freedom. It influences all walks of our life, from producing toys to producing natural gas to producing, you realize, I didn't realize this, but if you take oil and natural gas, you realize that it's the feedstock. We all know how important it is for lubricants and to heat a home, or to, run a blowtorch, or so many different things. But you know that there are over 6,000 items that are produced using natural gas or oil, mostly natural gas, as a feedstock. Natural gas is used to produce a lot of things down the road at Dow Chemical. It's a clean energy, and yet it is criticized as being unsafe, unhealthy in so many areas, and it's just not true. So I think, my overarching answer would be, Did you know natural gas is in pharmaceuticals? It's the leading feedstock to make fertilizers. Where would we be without fertilizers or pharmaceuticals? So I think it's important to get out there and to defend it, and they have the courage to defend it in meetings, in interviews, on the air. And I'm never anything other than proud when I meet a Northwood alum. And we have so many great alumni out there doing great things. And you look at the contributions of Dr. Watts and John Pafford and Dr. Haywood and Dr. Larry Reed, and you look at the current crop of Gabriel and Dale Matchek and Alex Takaroff, and there's just so many out there that are just doing a great job, and we just need to encourage. I think we need to get more of our sons, daughters, neighbors, cousins, colleagues at work, get their kids to look at a place like Northwood or Hillsdale or Grove City College. We need to get more people out there to do battle against bad ideas.
Thanks. All right, we're gonna have time for a few more questions, and then those questions that don't get answered today, I will definitely email them to Dr. Nash so you can, along with your email address, so you can respond to them personally if you'd like. Ken Horbatuk, hi Ken. Ken is talking about Milton Friedman in an interview said that the U.S. was not a capitalist country because of obviously Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Would you argue the closest country to capitalism was Hong Kong before 96? If not Hong Kong, then what country in this modern era is closest to capitalism?
Well, I would certainly agree with Friedman's statement. I would say Hong Kong technically has never been a country, but if I understand what Ken's asking, and I would agree, I would say absolutely. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of going to Hong Kong probably 4 times, 2 of them with Larry Reed, and just an incredible place. And as it relates to the question on tariffs, Hong Kong literally, when we met with Larry Jackson, the Ministry of Trade, when we were in Hong Kong the first time, Larry Jackson said, tariffs, we don't believe in tariffs. He said, we have to import in order to export. And so here's Hong Kong, an island and the tip of the Kowloon Peninsula, and they literally they imported most of their food. They imported all of their clean drinking water. They imported all of their energy, meaning natural gas or coal or oil to heat, to lubricate. And yet they were a manufacturing powerhouse. And so they literally had to import in order to export. And I think the top tax rate in Hong Kong before the Sino-British Agreement took effect was 14%. And the vast majority of citizens, I think it was only the top 25% that paid any income tax. And from the first 75% paid zero income tax. The top 25 paid somewhere between 1 and 4 or 1 and 16%. So yeah, I would have to agree with Ken on that one as well.
All right. Last question. That's a big one from Malata. With the guns and butter theory, how do you think that applies currently with everything on the horizon, with the developments, with Greenland, for instance? Can we expect the economy to get better, or is this something a lot of people have been fearing? Are we expecting a crash? There's a lot here. How can more of these capitalistic perspectives and angles aid the situation with current country debts as well as prices for the general public?
Well, I think it's a great question. The problem that we have today is that number one, I don't like some of the rhetoric that's going on around Greenland. I do think the president's right on the need to have Greenland as a secure place as part of the Iron Dome. Um, I think we could handle it better. All that aside, here's the point. When Ronald Reagan became president and started arguing the guns for butter argument, well, he won in 1980, he took office in 1981. The US national debt as a percent of GDP was about 30, it was either 32 or 36% of GDP. Today, the national debt is 122% of GDP. So we can't make that guns for butter argument today the way we were able to, roughly what, 45 years ago under President Reagan, because the national debt is so out of control and we're so hamstrung by it. And if you look at, even if you go to 1999, 2000, the national debt of the United States in 2000 was just under 6%. I'm sorry, just under $6 trillion. Today, it's almost 39 trillion. So we've gone, you go, let's say 2000. So if you take 2000 and you look at it, you can say that it was almost 225 years, took us almost 225 years, just a little short of that, to run up a $6 trillion national debt. And in roughly 25 years, we've taken the national debt from 6 trillion to 39 trillion. And so we have been highly irresponsible as a society and as a government in allowing these things to happen. And let me go back to Don's very good question. The last point I'll make is that, we teach at Northwood that you ought to be a lifelong learner. And I couldn't agree with that point in terms of the philosophy behind the Northwood education. But simultaneously, add to my statement about writing articles, giving speeches, etc. I'll add this to it to complement and supplement what Don was saying and thinking. We need to look in the mirror and understand that who's looking back at us is a big part of the problem as well. Meaning, did we vote? Did we go to the city hall, the state rally for a particular political candidate? Did we think of running ourselves? Did we make a difference to prevent this nonsense of going from a national debt of 6 trillion to a national debt of 39 trillion in roughly a quarter century? Where, look how much it took us 225 years to run up far less. And those are the things we have to examine. And I tell you, that's why Northwood is more important to this state, to this country, to this world than it's ever been before. Because if the United States falls, the world falls. If free enterprise and capitalism collapses, it will not be good for the world as a whole. Julie, thank you for a great opportunity. I hope it went well.
Thank you. Oh, it absolutely did. You've got lots of positive comments here. I did put your email address, Tim, in the chat. So if anyone has any additional questions to continue the conversation with Dr. Nash, you can email him at tgnash@northwood.edu. Just a reminder, we are going to send the recording out to you either this afternoon or tomorrow, along with a survey. So take a look at that and pass that along to anyone you want to share it with. Thanks again. And next week, we actually have another special edition webinar with our president, Kent McDonald. So we hope you can all come back and join us next Thursday, same time, same place, and to get a little more Northwood injection into your life. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.